Right, we start with the big story of the day. That's the election of a new pope. Joining us for more on that election of the new pope is SABC News correspondent Trent Murray, who joins us from Rome. Good to have you with us, Trent. Today, 1.4 billion Catholics around the world have a new leader, American-born Pope Leo XIV. Just talk us through the atmosphere this hour following that announcement.
Well, it has been an extraordinary couple of hours watching all of this unfold. Of course, crowds were gathering somewhat and mingling, watching the chimney to see whether there would be white smoke. But many in the crowd, when he spoke to them earlier in the day, were saying that it was unlikely to be today, that the conclave would select a new pope. They were expecting it would be Friday, as is generally been the tradition in recent decades. On the third day, the conclave has chosen, but they chose much faster, so you can just imagine the surprise and excitement that rippled across that crowd when the white smoke came out of that chimney. They were up on their feet, loud rounds of applause, cheering, singing, praying. And then as that was taking place in Vatican City, then it ricocheted across the Italian capital as word got out more broadly across Rome. Cars started tooting their horns, police were blowing their whistles, and then it was just a stampede of people from right across Rome, quite literally running down to the Vatican to try and get a seat and a spot in the crowd there, because they knew they were about to witness a moment of history when that Pope Leo XIV, as we now know, came onto that balcony.
We most certainly caught a glimpse of some of those images of jubilation. But Cardinal Robert Prevost is 69 years old, born in Chicago in the United States, but spending a significant amount of time in Peru. Just tell us more about the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV.
Well, he was selected by Pope Francis to be a cardinal. He was considered quite close with Pope Francis. But what many church insiders and experts are saying is that he is seen as someone who is both a good listener and someone that is thought that can bring both sort of sides of the church together, in terms of those with a more conservative outlook and those with a more progressive outlook. He is seen as someone that can be down the middle of the road and work with both sides. But despite being the first American Pope in history, which in itself is a huge moment, he has spent much of his time in the priesthood, working as a missionary in Peru, as you say, as well as Paraguay. He speaks Spanish, and I think that speaks volumes that he did much of the work in his professional life there, because it shows that he clearly wants to continue the sort of path of Pope Francis by trying to reach out from beyond Europe and America and to encourage the Catholic Church to continue its work in the global South. And so, look, I think what you're finding is many of the South Americans here, and there are quite a few of them, are quite excited by this result, because even though they know he's American born, they understand he spent much of his time living in Peru, and for them they consider that a real moment after, of course, the Argentinian Pope Francis.
Now, Trent, the first words of the pontificate are also viewed as quite significant, setting the tone or giving us a sense of his papacy. He touched on the need to build bridges through dialogue. So the theme was essentially that of peace. Just talk us through that first address.
It was a very nice address in which he started by saying, peace be upon you, to the crowd. They were yelling, Viva il Papa, long live the Pope, in Italian, and there was just a lot of excitement. He, of course, touched on his predecessor, Pope Francis, and many of those lines in that speech, I think, gave a hint into what his priorities will be. As I say, trying to shift the center of gravity in the Catholic Church away from here in Rome and to places like the African continent, South America, Asia, where we know Catholicism numbers are increasing, versus Europe, where they are decreasing. It, of course, will be very interesting to see where he chooses to travel on his first trip abroad. Will he look to travel somewhere further away in those regions? It certainly was something Pope Francis liked to do often, but it has to be said, he is only 69 years old, and so you would expect he will have a long tenure ahead in order to try and carve out his own legacy. And it'll be interesting to see whether he follows his predecessors speaking up on some of those issues like climate change and protecting refugees and social injustice. Will he look to use his position to have a loud voice on the world stage beyond the halls of the Catholic Church? We will have to wait and see, but it certainly will be very interesting having the first American Pope in place at a time where, you know, the US finds itself very much in the headlines on some of those key issues that were close to the heart of Pope Francis.
Most certainly a very significant moment. Thank you very much, Trent, for that reportage. That's SABC News correspondent Trent Murray in Rome for us.